So it's no secret, you know by this time, that I take issue with parts of the curriculum, with some of their hermeneutics, the way they interpret the Bible, um, and this one especially. So instead of just rushing through the lecture from the curriculum and then doing a whole in search alone on that, I'm just trying to match them together. So that's what we're gonna do. So some of this will be from what your book says, and some of it will be what I, with of course all of the influence and authority I have with my bachelor's degree in social studies education and physical education. So we're gonna do both at the same time. So I'm gonna begin with this quote from me, not a noted scholar. In John 7 through 9, we find Jesus at another Jewish festival. Much of this narrative occurs in and around the Feast of Tabernacles, a Jewish holiday celebrating the harvest of grapes and olives. The feast takes place in September or October, so late September, early October. Remember, just like Easter is for us, the Jewish holy days aren't the exact same day or the exact same days everywhere, like every year, like Christmas is December 25th. But Easter can kind of be March, can be in April, it can cross March and April. That's true of all of the Jewish feasts because of their calendar. So depending on the year. Because these crops needed protection, farmers would build huts in the field during the harvest. So that's where it gets its name. That's part of where it gets its name. So it's the grape and olive harvest, and they build these little booths or these little tabernacles. Tabernacle just means tent. And they'd stay out in the field so that they could be close to the crops to make sure that they weren't getting blistered by the sun or there wasn't too much rain or whatever. So that's this festival is called both the Feast of Booths and the Feast of Tabernacles. It means the same thing. But some people call it Feast of Booths, some people call it Feast of Tabernacles. Just remember, if you hear either, same thing, same festival. So in recognition of this fact, they build these booths. And as a reminder of Israel's desert wandering, people coming to Jerusalem for the feast would build makeshift huts to live in for the week. These booths gave the feast its name. So they're celebrating two things: the harvest, and they're remembering when the Jews were in the desert and they were living in little booths or little tents in the wilderness. And it also was very helpful for the people coming to Jerusalem because Jerusalem could swell as much as 2 or 3 times its population, and there weren't a lot of places for people to sleep, so they kind of brought their own camper. Their own tents. Two of the primary features of the feast were the water drawing ritual and the lamp lighting ritual. Jesus is going to use this occasion and the rituals, those 2 rituals, specifically to reveal to the crowds who he is, the source of living water and the light of the world. So now we're going to kind of go back to what the curriculum is saying, and you'll get to fill in some of the blanks here. So this is what verse 1 says. After this, we've seen those words before. We don't know exactly how long it is, but if the previous feast was sometime around, the Passover was near, so sometime between March, April, and September, October. So not really 6 months, but maybe 5 months. We don't know for sure, but some amount of time. Jesus went about in Galilee. He would not go about in Judea because the Jews were seeking to kill him. Now remember that, okay? Remember what that says, because I'm going to go through this with you. So the curriculum says that there are numerous reasons that have been offered by biblical scholars for Jesus' withdrawal from the public eye. Why did he stay in Galilee? Why didn't he go to Judea? And most of these, in fact, all but one, are somewhere between not important and ridiculous. So here's the first one, and you're going to get to fill in your blanks now. Those of you that are like, please make sure I get to fill in my blanks. I know, all you boys are that way. All you boys are that way. Well, the summer temperatures. The summer temperatures. It was hot. It was uncomfortable, and maybe Jesus wasn't manly enough to handle that heat. I don't think that was the problem. Every person who lives in the Middle East has gotten used to the heat. And that's not what the Bible tells us. And then the second one is that the Pharisees were growing more antagonistic. This is what the Bible tells us. So star that one. That's the reason. They were looking for an opportunity to arrest him, but it wasn't time for him to be arrested. So that's the only one we're given in Scripture. The third one, they say, is that people were excited about making him king. Maybe that's possible. That did happen at the feeding of the 5,000, but that was months ago. We don't, and this narrative doesn't say anything about that. And then Herod was growing suspicious. That's possible. He does end up having eventually a conversation with Herod, but I don't know of anywhere where it says that he's growing more suspicious. And then finally, Jesus needed rest. Well, maybe he did. He was fully man. But maybe. Oh, that wasn't the last one. And then as time goes on, Jesus spends more and more time training his disciples. And so that's a possibility that he was training his disciples during this time. But does the Bible tell us that? No. So I'm not going to tell you that's what he was doing, because it's not in the Bible. So here's the thing. Some of those things may have been true. Some are just patently made up. But John only mentions one of them. And so that's the one that's important. And I'm not willing to speculate beyond that. Yes, the opposition to Jesus is growing, and he needs to be careful that they don't arrest him too soon. Now that's not going to happen, because God's not going to let it happen. The next page we're just going to skip because it's the whole timing thing. That do you have a chart on there or something? It's a whole timing thing. And so John, the timing that they put here is based on their particular take on when Jesus died, and they believe there's certain, like they can give us an actual date and year when it would be disputed at best. So I just skip that stuff. You'll never have a question about which year did Jesus die. We don't know for sure. And I'll only tell you stuff that I know for sure. So the next thing is about his brother's selfish request. Was it selfish? Maybe. But I'm going to submit that I think more likely it was a taunting request. How many of you boys have a younger brother that's not way younger, not Riker? Like do you? It's like I had a really younger sister, and we were. But let's talk about your older brothers. Do you mind if I pick her? you mind?
No.
Okay. So, so Jabin and don't tell Xander, I didn't remember his name. I just said it on YouTube. Did they treat you well?
Yeah.
Really?
Very well.
All of you are lying much better. You're afraid they're going to beat you up. This is not- how much older or younger is your brother?
What?
What year is your like middle school? That's just a lovely year, lovely time. Isn't it? So y'all razz each other a little bit? Yeah. Call each other names?
No.
You don't call each other names? Well, good for you. Most brothers do. And sometimes they get into even fist fights when they get angry at each other and saying stuff. I think this is more his brothers taunting him. Remember, you need to remember, guys, you need to remember that they don't believe in Jesus at this point. They will, at least some of them will, but they don't believe in Jesus at this point. They think he's crazy. I think they're saying, well, why don't you go to Jerusalem and show people your miracles, Jesus? If you want to be famous, you got to go to the big city. I think it's more taunting than selfish, but I could be wrong. So the Feast of Tabernacles is approaching, and Jesus' brothers urge him to go now. Now remember, these are Jesus' half-brothers. They are the children of Joseph and Mary. He is the son of Mary and God. But they are half-brothers. They have the same mother. Yes.
Here it says
Interesting. Well, we won't worry about that. If there's stuff that you can't fill in, I'll go back to the new lecture that I don't like. Okay, great. Those brothers' names were James, Joseph, Simon, and Jude. James is the same James that wrote the book of James. And so he became a believer after Jesus' resurrection. He was the leader. He was the leader. The James, how do I know that this isn't James, of James and John fame? That James was martyred very, very early. James, the brother of Jesus, became the leader of the Jerusalem church for quite some time until they had to flee Jerusalem. Guys, you like sitting together? Because I'm going to have to move you. Whatever that is. Thank you. Also on YouTube, John. Nor do I could say your name, so your parents. But I might. Joseph and Simon, and then Jude. Jude is the author of the book of Jude. So at least James and Jude, I don't know for sure about Joseph and Simon, became followers of Christ after Jesus' resurrection. And so they're telling Jesus to go up to the Feast of Tabernacles. But why did the brothers want him to go to the Feast of Tabernacles? And we don't know for sure, but remember that they don't believe in him now. So the curriculum says that they wanted the Jews to see his miracles and make them their king. I don't think so. They don't believe in him. So I don't think that's correct. The second thing they say is that he would arrive with much fanfare. That's exactly what he's trying to avoid by waiting. So he doesn't want that to happen either. But it's possible that they want him to go now in public so that they can be kind of the followers. They can be kind of associated with that fame. Hey, he's our brother. we hate them, whatever. But I don't. I mean, the Bible doesn't tell us that, so we can't know for sure. But it's possible they're just mocking him, and I think that that's more likely. I mean, brothers haven't changed that much over the millennia. They tend to tease each other and make fun of each other, and so I think that's probably what they're saying is, hey, if you want to do miracles, don't stay here in Galilee. Galilee's nothing. Go to the big stage. Go to Jerusalem. And I think that's probably true. Um, so they were unbelieving at this point, and so they aren't asking him to do miracles because they believe he can do miracles. So what was this selfish request? Well, they I'll read this first. After this, Jesus went about in Galilee. He would not go about in Judea because the Jews were seeking to kill him. Now the Jews' feast of booths was at hand, was near. So his brothers said to him, leave here and go to Judea, that your disciples also may see the works that you are doing. For no one works in secret if he seeks to be known openly. If you would do these things, show yourself to the world. For not even his brothers believed it. So we are told that in Scripture. So they urged Jesus to attend that feast, but they fail to understand who he is. They certainly don't understand that he's going to die and for our sins and rise again. They don't believe in him, and nobody really understood that about him. So then Jesus says this, my time has not yet come, but your time is always here. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify about it that its works are evil. You go up to the feast. I'm not going up to this feast, for my time has not yet fully come. After saying this, he remained in Galilee. So I'm gonna give you my take on this whole thing. It says in the curriculum that it's not his time to die and it's not his purpose to disrupt the city. So it isn't his time to die, but I don't think that's what he's talking about. And nowhere does it say anything about him disrupting the city. He might have, had he gone with that fanfare, but we don't know for sure. So here's the thing. Do you remember this word? Anybody remember this word? Anybody remember what English word it is? Hour, right? And when he says, my hora has not come, my hour has not yet come, he's saying his time for his death and his resurrection, it's not time for that yet. When Jesus says, I'm not going up to the feast now, it's not my time, he uses a different word here. And that word is kairos. And it literally just means time. Like the kicking, like the ticking of the clock, right? Time goes by. So here's what I think about this. I think what Jesus is saying is it's not the right time for me to go to the feast. Because it was when everybody was going, and he didn't want that kind of fanfare. He wanted to wait and go secretly, which is exactly what Scripture tells us. Is that he waited and he went secretly, and when it was time, when it was the kairos to show himself, he will do so in the temple during the Feast of Tabernacles. But going with his brothers, going with a big bunch of people, making a big deal out of this was not what he wanted. So basically, what Jesus is saying is, you guys go anytime. Nobody cares if you go there or not. Just go ahead and go. But this isn't time. This isn't the time for me to go to the feast. This isn't the right time. And remember that Jesus only did what the Father told him to do. And it could be that the Father was telling him, wait. And that's a perfectly good answer. So, when people ask God for something, um, and God says yes, then they say, He answered my prayer. When people ask God for something and He says no, what do they say? He didn't answer my prayer. Wait a minute. If you ask your mom if you can take the car and go to the shopping mall, and she says no, do you ever say, why didn't you answer my question? No, because she did, right? No is a perfectly good answer to a request, also to a prayer. And so what Jesus is saying, sometimes, by the way, sometimes the answer is wait, that it's not time. And what Jesus is saying is, look, you can go to the feast anytime. Anytime works for you. But for me, I'm on God's agenda. I'm going to go when God says go. I'm not going to go until God says go. But his brothers weren't bound by that. His brothers didn't have to go on God's timetable. So I think kind of colloquially, what he's saying is, you guys go on. I'll follow later. I'll come later. And I think that's what that whole thing means. He isn't being deceitful and saying, I'm not going to the feast, and then he goes. He's saying, I'm not going now. It's not my time to go. So for the brothers, they can go anytime. But Jesus did things on God's time. So I just totally skipped this part. But the way the curriculum reads, it almost feels like Jesus is fearful to go to the feast. Maybe even dishonest, saying, I'm not going to go, and then he goes. But I think he's doing what I just said, that for reasons we do not know, it was not God's time for Jesus to go to the feast. So in a very loose sense, Jesus is saying, you go on, I'll catch you later. I'll be there. And I think that makes a good deal of sense given the context. So Jesus is going to end up going to the feast in secret. So he's not going to make a big entrance to the feast. So what were Jesus's reasons for not going to the feast yet? And I'm going to talk about that. Actually, no, because it's more of the same. Okay, so now we're going to talk about Jesus goes up to the feast in secret. But after his brothers had gone up to the feast, then he also went up, not publicly, but in private. The Jews were looking for him at the feast and saying, where is he? And there was much muttering about him among the people. While some said, he is a good man, others said, no, he is leading the people astray. Yet for fear of the Jews, no one spoke openly about him. No one wanted to be aligned with Jesus because it might show that they were his followers, and they didn't want to be known as that because they didn't want to get in trouble. So Jesus goes up the feast in secret, and this is one of the major feasts or festivals of Judaism. It was ordained by God in the Old Testament in Leviticus, that they do this, and it was a week long. This says 8 days, but festival of the Jews. And as I already told you, it was 7 days in duration. It says 8 here, in the fall. And then the Jews lived in booths. They made little huts to live in while they were there, and that's how it gets its name. And it was a celebration and a memorial to the harvest, for the harvest. It was almost a Thanksgiving. It's also called to God for giving them the land and the food that came from the land. So it's celebrating two things: the harvest and God giving the harvest and the food, but then also it's remembering the Israelites' time in the desert and how God cared for them and provided for them in the desert, and He still does. Do you want to know, whether you want to know or not, I'm going to tell you, what is the most often repeated command in the Bible? Remember who you once were. Remember what God has done for you. Remember when God did this. Remember, and remembering is really important to our faith. It's when we forget who God is and what He has done. It's when we begin to say, I don't. Is when we begin to veer off on a wrong track. And so over and over and over again, we're told to remember what God has done and who He is and what our response is to be. So it was a feast of gratitude to God. But on this particular festival, this particular feast, they have something else on their mind. They want to know where Jesus is. Obviously, He's going to do a miracle. He's going to provide food for us. And they're looking for Him. And as it says, they're muttering about Him. Interestingly, for a feast that talks about remembering the wandering in the desert, what did the Israelites do in the desert? They grumbled. In fact, the Greek word, I love this Greek word, is this. It even sounds like grumbling. And that's what the Jews were doing in the desert. And so interesting that in this feast where they're remembering all of that, they are now grumbling against God, against Jesus. Is He coming? What if He doesn't come? Oh, I don't know. Is He going to do a miracle? And so they're gongus mossing themselves. I just made that part up. And so he ends up going to Jerusalem secretly because he is in control of what's going to happen here, not the Jewish. Okay, we're going to stop there, and we'll pick up there tomorrow. And you can chat.
We don't